My stepdaughter suggested my husband and I film ourselves. I thought it was just a passing joke, until she used it to uncover the cracks in our marriage. But what happens when a secret this intimate falls into the wrong hands? This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about manipulation, vulnerability, and the dark twists that can tear a family apart. Stay tuned to find out how one reckless act turned into a nightmare none of us could escape. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories like this one, and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It began with a subtle shift in the air, one I didn't fully notice until it was too late. Emily, my stepdaughter, was always a bold presence in our home, her confidence lighting up every room she entered. At 21, she had a sharp wit and a way of making people feel exposed under her gaze. My husband, Michael, adored her in a way that was undeniably proud, but, to me, sometimes unsettling. I chalked it up to my own insecurities. Our marriage wasn't the vibrant, passionate union it once was. I spent my days going through motions. Coffee at 7 a.m., errands by noon, dinner at 6 p.m. Michael, preoccupied with work, barely looked at me anymore. And then there was Emily, vivacious, striking, and utterly magnetic. She'd lounge on the couch, legs casually draped over the armrest, as if she owned the place. One evening, as I prepared dinner, she smirked at me from her perch. "You two are so tame," she teased. "Excuse me?" I asked, setting down the spatula. "You and Dad, you act more like roommates than a couple." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. Emily's meddling didn't stop at casual observations. Over dinner one night, she made an audacious suggestion that left me and Michael reeling. "You know what would spice things up?" she began, twirling spaghetti around her fork. "You two should make a little video together. It's what couples do these days, totally normal." Michael nearly choked on his wine. "Emily!" "What?" she said innocently, though her eyes sparkled with mischief. "It's not like I'm suggesting you upload it or anything. Just something private for the two of you." I laughed nervously, trying to wave off her ridiculous idea, but over the next few days I noticed Michael's demeanor shift. He was quieter, distracted, as though Emily's words had planted a seed in his mind. In June 2009, one evening, after Emily had gone out with friends, Michael approached me in the kitchen. His tone was tentative, almost shy, a rarity in our marriage. "Do you think Emily had a point?" he asked. "About what?" I replied, even though I knew exactly what he meant. "About, recording ourselves." I blinked, unsure how to respond. Michael, the same man who used to scoff at modern trends, was seriously considering this? "I don't know," I said carefully. "It feels strange." But as the days passed, the idea began to take root in my own mind. I couldn't shake the memory of Michael's eyes lighting up at the suggestion, a spark I hadn't seen in years. If this could reignite something between us, wasn't it worth a try? That Saturday, with Emily conveniently staying out late, we set up the camera in our bedroom. The process was awkward and clumsy at first, adjusting the angle, laughing nervously. But as the night wore on, we rediscovered a side of each other that had been buried under years of routine. Michael was tender and attentive, his touch rekindling sensations I thought I'd lost. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen. The next morning, as we basked in the afterglow, Michael promised to store the memory card safely. "I'll keep it locked in my desk," he said. But by the time I looked for it later that week, the card was gone. "Have you seen the memory card?" I asked Michael one evening as he prepared for work. No. Did you move it? No. Panic bubbled in my chest. We turned the house upside down, but it was nowhere to be found. Late one night, unable to sleep, I wandered downstairs for water. That's when I saw Emily in the living room, the glow of the TV illuminating her face. She didn't hear me approach. My breath caught in my throat as I saw what was playing on the screen. A recording. Emily, I gasped, my voice shaking. She jumped, fumbling with the remote. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension in the room was suffocating. How did you? I stammered. I found the card, she said, her tone disturbingly calm. You two looked happy. I wanted to see what brought that out in you. Her words sent a chill down my spine. Emily wasn't embarrassed or apologetic. If anything, she seemed amused by my horror. This is private, I snapped, snatching the remote from her hand. You had no right. Relax, she said, leaning back on the couch. I'm not going to show anyone, but maybe you should thank me for helping you and Dad reconnect. Her smugness was infuriating, but beneath my anger lay something more troubling, a flicker of doubt about her intentions. Over the next few weeks, Emily's behavior grew increasingly bold. She made comments that bordered on inappropriate, her gaze lingering on Michael in ways that made me uncomfortable. Michael seemed oblivious, brushing off her flirtations as harmless jokes. But I wasn't so sure. One afternoon, I walked into the living room to find Emily perched on the armrest of Michael's chair, her hand casually brushing his shoulder. My stomach churned at the sight. Am I interrupting something? I asked, my voice sharp. Emily smirked, unfazed by my tone. Not at all. Dad and I were just catching up. The tension reached a boiling point during a family dinner. Emily made a sly remark about the hidden passions in our marriage, her eyes gleaming with mischief. I slammed my fork down, my patience finally snapping. Enough, I shouted, startling both Michael and Emily. This needs to stop. Emily feigned innocence, but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. Michael looked confused, caught between us. Why are you acting like this? He asked, his tone exasperated. Because she's manipulating us, I exclaimed, my voice cracking. The confrontation spiraled into chaos, secrets spilling out like poison. Emily admitted to orchestrating the entire situation, confessing that she'd taken the card to provoke a reaction. I just wanted to see what would happen, she said, her tone devoid of remorse. Michael was furious, but his anger was directed at me for allowing Emily to manipulate me into believing there was something between them. Our marriage hung by a thread, the trust between us shattered. As for Emily, she showed no signs of regret. In the end, I faced a choice: expose her manipulations and risk destroying what little remained of our family, or stay silent and carry the burden of this secret alone. As I stood in the wreckage of our lives, I realized there were no easy answers. It began with a comment, a simple, offhanded remark that lodged itself into my mind like a splinter. Emily, my 21-year-old stepdaughter, was lounging on the couch, one leg casually draped over the armrest, scrolling through her phone. Her presence in the house was a mix of comfort and chaos. She had always been bold, the type who could charm or disarm with equal ease. Her confidence was magnetic, though sometimes too much for me to handle. That night, As I stood in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, she tilted her head back over the edge of the couch, her green eyes glinting mischievously in the dim light. "You and Dad are so boring," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. I glanced up from the sink, startled. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Oh," she smirked, flipping her phone between her hands. "You know what I mean. You've been married for what, 7 years? And you act more like housemates than a couple." Her words stung more than I cared to admit. My relationship with Michael had settled into a predictable routine over the years, a routine that sometimes felt more like a chore than a marriage. Dinner at 7, a movie on the couch, conversations about bills and schedules, but never about us. "We're comfortable," I said, trying to brush off her comment. "Comfortable? That's just a fancy word for dull." Emily sat up, her lips curving into a knowing smile. "You guys need to spice things up. Do something exciting, like filming yourselves." My hands froze mid-scrub, the plate slipping back into the soapy water. "Excuse me?" She laughed, clearly enjoying my reaction. "You know what I mean. A little home video action. It's not weird. Tons of people do it. It's like a modern love letter." "Emily." I turned to face her, cheeks burning. "That's completely inappropriate." Michael walked into the kitchen just then, his tie loosened and a glass of wine in hand. "What's inappropriate?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Your daughter," I said pointedly, glaring at Emily. "She thinks we should record ourselves?" Michael nearly choked on his drink. "What?" Emily shrugged, completely unbothered. "I'm just saying, it might be good for you. Think of it as relationship therapy. No harm in trying something new." I expected Michael to scold her, but instead he chuckled nervously, shaking his head. "You've got quite the imagination, Em." She grinned, satisfied with herself, and sauntered out of the room. I tried to laugh it off, but her words lingered. They stirred something in me, a mix of embarrassment, irritation, and a faint, unsettling curiosity. The days that followed felt different. Michael was quieter than usual, his gaze lingering on me a little longer than normal, as if he were studying me. I caught him watching me while I got ready for bed one night, his expression unreadable. "Why?" I asked, feeling self-conscious under his scrutiny. "Nothing," he said quickly, looking away. But it wasn't nothing. There was a shift in the air between us, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was as though Emily's outrageous suggestion had opened a door we weren't ready to walk through, but couldn't quite close either. One evening, as I folded laundry in the living room, Michael sat down beside me. His movements were hesitant, almost nervous. "Do you think Emily had a point?" he asked, his voice low. I paused, the shirt in my hands forgotten. "About what?" About filming ourselves." I stared at him, unsure if he was serious. "Michael, you can't be—" "Oh, I know it sounds crazy," he interrupted, his cheeks flushing, "but maybe it's not such a bad idea. I mean, we've been stuck in a rut, haven't we?" "A rut?" The word stung. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't mean it like that. I miss us. The way we used to be. Don't you?" His vulnerability caught me off guard. Michael wasn't one to open up about his feelings, especially not about our relationship. Part of me wanted to dismiss the idea outright, to call it absurd and put the conversation to rest. But another part of me, a quieter, more insecure part, wondered if this was my chance to reignite something between us. "I don't know," I said finally. "It feels Strange. Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. I get that. Just think about it, okay? Over the next few days, the idea took root in my mind. I found myself looking at Michael differently, remembering the passion we'd once shared. It had been years since we'd truly been intimate, not just physically, but emotionally. Could something as outlandish as this really bring us closer? Emily, of course, noticed the shift in the atmosphere. She had a knack for reading people, and her smirk told me she knew exactly what was going through my mind. "You're welcome," she said one afternoon as we sat in the kitchen. "For what?" I asked, frowning. "For giving you and Dad a little nudge." She winked, her confidence infuriating. "You can thank me later." I rolled my eyes, but her words stayed with me. The turning point came one Friday evening. Emily was out with friends, and the house was unusually quiet. Michael and I sat on the couch, the glow of the TV casting soft shadows across the room. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael took my hand, his eyes searching mine. "Only if you are." I hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. This wasn't just about filming ourselves, it was about rediscovering each other, about breaking free from the monotony that had taken hold of our marriage. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's do it." Michael's face lit up with a mixture of relief and excitement. "Really? Really?" I said, though my heart was racing. We spent the next hour setting up the camera in our bedroom, adjusting the angle and testing the lighting. It felt ridiculous at first, awkward and forced. But as the night wore on, something shifted. The laughter gave way to tenderness, and for the first time in years, I felt truly connected to Michael. When it was over, we lay tangled in each other's arms, the camera forgotten. "I'll keep the memory card somewhere safe," Michael murmured, his voice heavy with sleep. I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in a long time. Maybe this was exactly what we needed. But that hope would soon be replaced by something far darker. By the following morning, the memory of what Michael and I had shared lingered in the air like the scent of rain after a storm. Subtle, yet inescapable. He kissed me on the forehead before leaving for work, a gesture that felt almost foreign. For years, his goodbyes had been rushed, distracted, but today there was tenderness, a softness that stirred something in me. I went about my day with a renewed energy, replaying the events of the previous night in my mind. It felt like a secret we shared, something intimate that had reignited a spark. But Emily wasn't one to let anything go unnoticed. That afternoon, as I was tidying up the living room, she strolled in, carrying a shopping bag. "You're glowing," she said, a sly grin spreading across her face. I paused, caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, come on," she teased, dropping onto the couch. "I know that look. Something happened last night, didn't it?" I tried to play it cool, brushing her off with a casual laugh. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" she shot back, her gaze sharp and knowing. "Let me guess. You and Dad finally took my advice?" The room suddenly felt too warm, the walls closing in around me. How could she possibly know? "Emily, that's enough," I said, my tone firm. But she wasn't deterred. Leaning forward, she rested her chin on her hand, her expression one of pure satisfaction. "You can thank me later," she said with a wink. I left the room, my mind racing. Had we been that obvious? Or was this just another one of her games? And had I missed anything? Act 3. The seed takes root. The following days were a mix of tension and anticipation. Michael and I avoided discussing the video, as if speaking about it would break the fragile spell it had cast over us. But there was an unspoken understanding between us, a sense of closeness that hadn't been there before. Then, one evening, everything changed. "Have you seen the memory card?" Michael asked as we cleaned up after dinner. I froze, the dish in my hand slipping slightly. "No, why?" "It's not where I left it," he said, his brow furrowed. "I thought maybe you moved it." "I didn't touch it," I said, a knot of unease forming in my stomach. We searched the house from top to bottom, checking drawers, cabinets, and even the pockets of Michael's work bag. But the card was nowhere to be found. "It has to be here somewhere," Michael said, though his voice lacked conviction. I tried to shake off the growing sense of dread. It was just a piece of plastic, easily misplaced. But the thought of it falling into the wrong hands made my skin crawl. Later that night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. Michael's soft snores filled the room, a stark contrast to the storm raging in my mind. Where could it have gone? Unable to quiet my thoughts, I got up and went downstairs, hoping a glass of water would calm my nerves. That's when I saw it. The faint glow of the television spilling out from the living room. My heart skipped a beat. It was nearly midnight. Who could possibly be awake? I moved closer, my footsteps silent on the hardwood floor. As I approached, the sound of muffled voices reached my ears. My voice. And then I saw her. Emily was sitting on the couch, her eyes fixed on the screen. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what she was watching. It was our video. The air seemed to leave the room all at once. For a moment, I couldn't move, my body frozen in a mix of shock and horror. "Emily," I whispered, my voice trembling. She turned slowly, her expression calm, almost smug. "Oh, hi, Mom," she said, as if nothing was amiss. I took a step forward, my hands clenched into fists. "What? What are you doing?" Her gaze flicked back to the screen, where the frozen image of Michael and me was still visible. "I was just curious," she said, her tone infuriatingly casual. "Curious?" I repeated, my voice rising. "That's private. You had no right." "Oh, relax," she interrupted, leaning back against the cushions. "It's not like I'm going to show anyone. But you have to admit, it's kind of hot. You and Dad getting all passionate. Who knew you had it in you?" My face burned with humiliation. "Turn it off." Now, with a shrug, she picked up the remote and clicked the power button. But the damage was already done. "How did you even get that?" I demanded, my voice shaking. She didn't answer right away, instead studying me with a look that made my skin crawl. "Let's just say you're not as good at hiding things as you think." I stared at her, my mind racing. Had she been snooping in our room? Had she watched us without our knowledge? The thought made me feel sick. "You had no right," I said again, though the words felt hollow. Emily stood, brushing past me with a smirk. "Relax, Mom. It's not a big deal. If anything, you should be thanking me. I mean, I'm the one who gave you the idea in the first place, right?" As she disappeared up the stairs, I sank onto the couch, my legs too weak to hold me. The room felt suffocating, the silence deafening. What had just happened? The next morning, I confronted Michael. "She took the card," I said, my voice tight with anger. "She watched it." Michael's face darkened. "What? Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure," I snapped. "She admitted it." He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw clenched. That's crossing the line. I'll talk to her." But when he approached Emily later that day, she played the part of the innocent perfectly. I didn't mean any harm, she said, her wide eyes full of feigned remorse. I was just curious. I won't do it again, I promise. Michael seemed to accept her apology, but I wasn't convinced. There was something about the way she looked at me, a glint of triumph in her eyes that set my nerves on edge. Over the next few days, Emily's behavior grew more unsettling. She lingered in the living room when Michael and I were together, her gaze often lingering on him a little too long. "Don't you think Dad looks great in that shirt?" she said one afternoon, her voice light but her eyes sharp. Michael laughed, oblivious to the tension. "Thanks, Em." I forced a smile, but inside, my unease was growing. I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that Emily's involvement in our lives was no longer harmless. But at the same time, Michael seemed lighter, more attentive, and eager to find ways to connect with me again. Maybe it was because we had opened a door to each other that hadn't been opened in years, and I didn't want to lose that. We agreed to try another night of recording. This time, we were alone, the house silent, Emily gone to a friend's place. Michael set up the camera again, adjusting the tripod while I sat on the edge of the bed, fiddling with the edge of my robe. I couldn't decide whether this felt like an adventure or a terrible mistake. "You okay?" he asked, turning to me with a small smile. I nodded. "Yeah, it just feels different." Good different or bad different? "Both," I admitted. He sat beside me, his hand brushing mine. "We don't have to do this if you're not comfortable." But part of me wanted to do it, to prove something, not just to him, but to myself. Emily's judgmental comments had struck a nerve I didn't know existed. I wanted to reclaim what was ours, to remind her and myself that this was my relationship, my marriage, my life. "I'm okay," I said. "Let's do it." That night was less awkward than the first. We laughed less and connected more, the camera almost forgotten as we focused entirely on each other. When it was over, Michael kissed me softly, his hands cupping my face. "I miss this," he whispered. I nodded, feeling a mix of satisfaction and relief. The next morning, I watched him carefully place the memory card in a small lockbox he kept in his office. "No one's getting this one," he said with a wink. But 2 days later, the lockbox was empty. Act 5, the missing memory card. Panic coursed through me as I tore apart Michael's office, searching for the card. He stood beside me, his brow furrowed, frustration etched into every line of his face. "Don't understand," he said for the 5th time. "I locked it. No one else has the key." "Someone must have taken it," I said, my voice trembling. "You're sure you didn't leave it somewhere else?" "I know I didn't," he snapped, his temper finally breaking. I flinched at the sharpness of his tone, but I couldn't blame him. The idea that our private moment was now out of our control was unbearable. We searched every inch of the house, but the card was nowhere to be found. By the end of the day, Michael was pacing the living room, muttering to himself, while I sat on the couch, my head in my hands. "It's got to turn up," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. But deep down, I already knew where it was, or rather who had it. Amoy. Later that evening, as I walked past her room, I hesitated. Her door was slightly ajar, and I could hear the faint sound of her humming. For a moment, I considered barging in, demanding answers. But something held me back. Instead, I decided to wait until I had proof. Act 6, the unveiling. It didn't take long. That same night, I woke up to the sound of muffled laughter. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but as I sat up in bed, I realized the sound was coming from downstairs. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Michael, and crept down the stairs. The laughter grew louder, accompanied by the faint glow of the TV. And then I heard it, my voice. My stomach twisted as I rounded the corner and saw Emily sitting on the couch, the remote in her hand, the video playing on the screen. "Emily," I said, my voice shaking. She didn't even flinch, her eyes still glued to the screen. "You really outdid yourself this time, Mom," she said, a smirk curling her lip. "Turn it off," I snapped, my anger overpowering my fear. With an exaggerated sigh, she paused the video, but the damage was done. The image on the screen, Michael and me, locked in an intimate embrace, burned into my vision. "How could you do this?" I demanded, stepping forward. "This was private. It's none of your business." She stood, crossing her arms over her chest. "Relax, Mom. It's not like I'm going to upload it or anything. I just wanted to see what all the fuss was about." Her nonchalance was infuriating. "This isn't a joke, Emily. You had no right." "No right?" she interrupted, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I'm the one who gave you the idea in the first place. If anything, you should be thanking me for spicing up your boring little marriage." I stared at her, my hands trembling with rage. "This isn't funny." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, you're acting like I ruined your life. I'm just curious, that's all." "Curious?" I repeated, my voice rising. "This is beyond inappropriate. You crossed a line, Emily." She took a step closer, her smirk fading. For the first time, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something dark and unsettling. "Maybe I did," she said quietly. "But let's not pretend this is all on me. You're the one who agreed to it. You're the one who let me get inside your head." Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. "Get out of my sight," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She shrugged, brushing past me as if nothing had happened. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the image on the TV screen still frozen in place, a cruel reminder of how far things had spiraled out of control. The fallout. The next morning, I told Michael everything. "She took the card," I said, my voice trembling. She watched it. He stared at me, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. "What? Why would she—" "I don't know," I said, cutting him off, "but she did. And she doesn't even seem to care." Michael's jaw tightened. This is too much. I'll talk to her." But when he confronted her, Emily played the part of the innocent perfectly. "I didn't mean to upset anyone," she said, her voice soft, her eyes wide with feigned remorse. "I was just curious. I won't do it again, I promise." Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Just don't let it happen again, Emily. This isn't a joke." She nodded, her expression contrite. But as she glanced at me, a small, satisfied smile tugged at the corner of her lips. The unease between us only grew in the days that followed. Emily's presence in the house felt like a ticking time bomb, her every word and action laced with subtle provocations. "You should wear that shirt more often, Dad," she said one evening, her tone light but her gaze far too intent. Michael laughed, oblivious to the tension. But I wasn't. Every interaction felt like a challenge, a reminder that she held the upper hand. And I was beginning to realize just how dangerous that could be. The unease in the house was palpable. Every interaction with Emily felt like navigating a minefield, her every word and action calculated to provoke. Michael, ever the optimist, dismissed her behavior as harmless teasing, but I knew better. There was an edge to her now, a sharpness that hadn't been there before. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I caught her in the kitchen with Michael. I had been upstairs folding laundry, but something drew me downstairs, a feeling I couldn't ignore. I was caught 4 seconds later watching my short-haired daughter move around the living room. The sight that greeted me made my stomach churn. Emily was perched on the counter, her legs swinging casually as she laughed at something Michael had said. He stood by the coffee maker, a mug in hand, his posture relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't the scene itself that unsettled me, but the way Emily looked at him, her gaze lingering just a second too long, her laughter too intimate. A moment like this, the audience might forget. "Am I interrupting?" I asked, stepping into the room. Michael turned to me, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Good morning, sweetheart. Want some coffee?" Emily's eyes met mine, and for a fleeting moment I saw the challenge in them. "We were just talking about that movie you two watched last night," she said, her tone light. "Dad says it was your pick, but honestly, it sounded more like his kind of thing." I forced a smile, my hands tightening into fists at my sides. "It was a mutual decision," I said. Emily slid off the counter, brushing past me as she left the room. "I'll leave you two lovebirds alone," she said over her shoulder, her words dripping with sarcasm. I turned to Michael, my chest tight with anger. "Do you not see what she's doing?" He frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" "She's manipulating you," I said, my voice rising. "The way she looks at you, the things she says, it's not normal." I gave him a penetrating look. Michael shook his head, setting his coffee down on the counter. "You're overreacting. Emily's just being Emily. She's always had a flair for the dramatic." "That's not what this is," I insisted. "She's crossing boundaries, and you're letting her." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'll talk to her, okay? But you need to calm down. She's our daughter." "She's your daughter," I snapped, the words escaping before I could stop them. Michael's expression hardened. "That's not fair, and you know it." The tension between us was suffocating, but before I could say anything else, he walked out of the room. The next few weeks were a blur of small, calculated provocations. Emily seemed to delight in pushing me to my limits, her every action designed to needle under my skin. One evening, I walked into the living room to find her sitting far too close to Michael on the couch, her hand resting lightly on his arm as they laughed at something on the TV. "Can you grab me some water, Mom?" she asked without looking up, as if I were the help rather than her stepmother. I didn't respond, my gaze fixed on her hand. She noticed, of course. She noticed everything, and smirked as she slowly withdrew it. It wasn't just her behavior toward Michael that concerned me. She was becoming increasingly bold with me too, her comments laced with a venom that she no longer bothered to hide. She came into the front one day carrying her ex-husband in a waist of beautiful clothes. "You're looking tired, Mom," she said one morning as I made breakfast. "Maybe you should take a break from playing the perfect housewife. It's clearly not working." I clenched my teeth, refusing to rise to her bait. "Oh, come on," she continued, leaning against the counter. "Don't be mad. I'm just trying to help." "Help?" I said, turning to face her. "Is that what you think you're doing?" She shrugged, her smirk widening. "Someone has to. You're obviously not capable of keeping Dad interested on your own." Her words hit their mark, and she knew it. Act 8. The breaking point. The breaking point came on a stormy Friday night. The rain lashed against the windows as the three of us sat down for dinner. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unspoken words. Emily, as always, was the first to break the silence. "Dad, you should take Mom on a vacation," she said, her tone deceptively sweet. "You know, rekindle the romance. Or do you think it's too late for that?" Michael chuckled nervously, clearly uncomfortable. "That's enough, Emily," he said. But she wasn't done. "I'm just saying it might be good for you, you know, before things fizzle out completely." "Emily," I said sharply, my patience finally snapping, "that's enough." She leaned back in her chair, her smirk never faltering. "What?" "I'm just trying to help." Michael set his fork down, his expression serious. "Emily, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this behavior needs to stop." Her eyes narrowed slightly, the playful glint replaced by something colder. "What behavior?" she asked, her tone suddenly defensive. "You know what I'm talking about," he said firmly. "The comments, the attitude. It's not okay. It's not true." For a moment she looked genuinely taken aback, but then she laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that sent chills down my spine. "You're one to talk," she said, her voice low, acting like the perfect husband while sneaking around behind Mom's back. Michael's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, come on," she said, her gaze flicking to me. "You don't think I've noticed? The way he looks at other women, the late nights at work. Do you really believe he's as perfect as he pretends to be?" My heart pounded in my chest, the room spinning around me. "That's enough," Michael said, his voice shaking. "You're crossing a line." "Am I?" she shot back, standing up. "Maybe it's time someone said it. You're both living in this fantasy world, pretending everything's fine, when it's not. Dad's checked out, and you—" She turned to me, her eyes blazing. "You're so desperate to hold on to him that you'll do anything, even if it means humiliating yourself." The words hung in the air like a slap. "You don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice trembling. "Don't I?" she said, her smirk returning. "I saw the video, remember? Trust me, Mom, you're not the only one who's embarrassed." The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down on us like a physical force. Michael looked at me, his expression a mix of confusion and anger. "What video?" He leached with anxiety. My throat went dry, my pulse racing. This wasn't how I wanted him to find out. "It's nothing," I said quickly. "Just forget it." But Emily wasn't about to let it go. "Oh, it's definitely not nothing," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "In fact, I think Dad should see it, don't you?" "That's enough," I shouted, slamming my hands on the table. Emily stared at me, her smirk finally fading. For the first time, she looked uncertain, as if she hadn't expected me to fight back. "This stops now," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "I don't care what game you think you're playing, but it's over. Do you understand me?" She didn't respond, her expression unreadable. Michael stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "I think we all need to cool off," he said, his voice tight. He left the room, leaving me and Emily alone. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she turned to me, her eyes cold and unyielding. "You can try to stop me, Mom," she said quietly. "But we both know it's too late." With that, she walked out, leaving me sitting at the table, the storm outside a reflection of the chaos inside. Emily's words lingered long after she left the dining room, echoing in my mind like the aftermath of a thunderclap. "You can try to stop me, Mom, but we both know it's too late." What was too late? What did she mean? I sat at the table, staring at the half-eaten dinner, my appetite long gone. Upstairs, I could hear Michael pacing the bedroom floor. He hadn't spoken to me since he'd stormed off, his silence cutting deeper than any words could have. Emily's audacity had gone too far. She wasn't just pushing boundaries anymore, she was tearing them apart, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done. Later that night, I found Michael in the bedroom, his arms crossed as he stared out the window. "We need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned to me, his expression hard to read. "What's going on, Claire? What's this video she's talking about?" I hesitated, my chest tightening. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it to me," he said, his tone edged with frustration. I took a deep breath, the words spilling out before I could stop them. I told him everything. How Emily had planted the idea, how we'd recorded the video, how I'd trusted him to keep it safe. "And then she found it," I finished, my voice breaking. "She watched it, Michael. She's been using it to manipulate us ever since." He stared at me, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I was scared," I admitted. I thought I could handle it. I didn't want to make things worse." "Well, congratulations," he said bitterly. "Because things are worse." The finale. Shattered illusions. The next morning, I woke to the sound of voices downstairs. Michael and Emily, their tones heated and sharp. I threw on a robe and rushed to the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. "What's going on?" I demanded, stepping into the room. Michael turned to me, his face flushed with anger. "She admitted it," he said, his voice trembling. "She took the video. She's been playing games with us this whole time." Emily stood by the couch, her arms crossed, a smug smile on her lips. "Oh, come on, Dad, don't act so surprised. You know as well as I do that this family's been a mess for years. I just gave it a little nudge." "This isn't a game, Emily," Michael snapped. "You've crossed every line imaginable. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Of course I do," she said coolly. "I've made you see the truth." "What truth?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. She turned to me, her eyes cold. "That this marriage is a joke. That you're both so desperate to hold on to something that's already gone, you'll do anything. Humiliate yourselves, destroy each other, just to keep up the illusion." "That's enough," Michael said, his voice sharp. But she wasn't finished. "Face it, Dad," she said, her tone biting. "You're not happy. You haven't been for years. And you," she added, turning to me, "you're just as pathetic, clinging to a man who's already checked out." Her words were like knives, cutting deeper with every syllable. "You don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice trembling. "Don't I?" she shot back. "I've lived in this house for years. I've seen everything. You're both pretending, lying to yourselves, and now, thanks to me, you can't hide it anymore." Michael turned to me, his expression pained. "Is that true? Are we just pretending?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Because deep down, I wasn't sure. The room fell into a tense silence, the weight of her accusations hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Michael spoke. "You're leaving, Emily." Her eyes widened, the first hint of genuine surprise crossing her face. "What?" "You've made your point," he said, his voice steady. "You've caused enough damage. It's time for you to go." "You can't be serious," she said, her tone incredulous. "I am," he said firmly. "Pack your things. You're moving out." For a moment, she seemed at a loss for words, but then her smirk returned, her confidence undeterred. "Fine," she said, brushing past him, "but don't think for a second this is over." She was gone by the end of the day, leaving behind a silence that was almost deafening. Michael and I sat on opposite ends of the couch, the distance between us feeling insurmountable. "What happens now?" I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know. For the first time in years, we were forced to confront the cracks in our marriage, the truths we'd been avoiding for so long. Over the weeks that followed, we began the painful process of rebuilding. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes. But slowly, we started to find our way back to each other, piece by fragile piece. As for Emily, she faded from our lives, her presence reduced to an occasional text or phone call. But her words, her accusations lingered, a constant reminder of the damage she had done. Months later, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, the house quiet and still. The memory of everything that had happened played in my mind like a film on repeat, each scene more painful than the last. "Stay here," the voice told me. Had Emily been right? Was our marriage just an illusion, a fragile facade we clung to out of fear and habit? Or had we found something real, something worth fighting for? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that we were still here, still trying, still holding on. And for now, that was enough. The days following Emily's departure were quieter than I had expected, but they were far from peaceful. Her presence lingered in every corner of the house, in every room where she had made herself at home. It was as if she had left a shadow behind, a reminder of the chaos she'd unleashed and the truths she'd forced us to confront. Michael and I barely spoke in those first days. He threw himself into work, leaving early in the morning and returning late at night. I, on the other hand, wandered through the house aimlessly, unable to focus on anything for more than a few minutes. The silence between us was deafening, each unspoken word building a wall that seemed impossible to tear down. But it wasn't just the silence that unnerved me. It was the doubt, the creeping uncertainty that Emily's words had planted in my mind. Was she right? Had we been pretending all along? And if so, what were we even trying to save? A letter from Emily. A week after she left, the letter arrived in the mail. The sight of Emily's loopy handwriting on the envelope made my stomach turn. Michael was still at work, so I opened it alone, my hands trembling. "Dear Mom and Dad, I'm sure you're both relieved to have the house to yourselves again. Don't worry, I'm not writing to stir up more trouble. I just wanted to say a few things that I didn't get to say before I left. First, I know I hurt you, both of you, and for that I'm sorry. It wasn't my intention to cause so much pain. I was angry and confused, and I lashed out in ways that weren't fair to either of you. But there's something you need to understand. Everything I said, every harsh word, every accusation, it all came from a place of truth. You can hate me for it, but deep down you know I was right. You've been living a lie for years, pretending that everything's fine when it's not. And until you face that, you'll never truly be happy. I hope you can find a way to fix things, not for me, but for yourselves. Emily." I stared at the letter for a long time, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite name. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to erase her words from existence, but another part, the part that was tired of pretending, knew that she was right. That night, I showed the letter to Michael. He read it in silence, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he set it down on the table and looked at me. "She's not wrong," he said, finally, his voice heavy with resignation. I nodded, the weight of his words sinking into my chest. "So where does that leave us?" He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know, but I think we need to figure it out together." It was the first honest conversation we'd had in years, and it wasn't an easy one. We talked late into the night, laying everything bare: the resentment, the disappointments, the fears that had been festering beneath the surface. It was painful and raw, but it was also a relief. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were truly seeing each other. The days that followed were tentative, each one a cautious step toward something new. Michael started coming home earlier, making an effort to spend time with me instead of burying himself in work. I, in turn, tried to let go of the bitterness that had been weighing me down, focusing instead on the small moments of connection that we had overlooked for so long. It wasn't a smooth process. There were setbacks, arguments that left us questioning whether we were making the right choice. But there were also moments of hope, small victories that reminded us why we had chosen each other in the first place. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Michael reached for my hand. "Do you think we can make this work?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I squeezed his hand, my own doubts mirrored in his eyes. "I think we owe it to ourselves to try." Months passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. Michael and I were far from perfect, but we were trying, and that was enough, for now. Emily, however, remained a distant presence, her occasional texts and phone calls a stark contrast to the chaos she had once brought into our lives. Then, one afternoon, she showed up at the door. I was in the kitchen when I heard the knock. My heart raced as I opened the door, unsure of what to expect. She stood there, her expression guarded, a suitcase by her side. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "Emily," I said, my voice catching. "What are you doing here?" I wanted to talk," she said, her gaze flicking to the floor. "Can I come in?" I hesitated for a moment before stepping aside. She walked into the house, her presence both familiar and jarring. We sat in the living room, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she said finally, her voice trembling. "And I know I can't take back what I did, but I want to try to make things right." Her words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to let go of the anger and hurt that had been consuming me, but another part, the part that had been scarred by her betrayal, wasn't ready to let her off so easily. "Emily," I said, choosing my words carefully, "what you did, it hurt. It hurt me, and it hurt Michael. And it's going to take time to heal from that." Mavis smirked. "It hurt you." "I know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know I messed up, but I want to be better. I want to be someone you can trust again." Her vulnerability was unexpected, and it cracked something inside me. For all her flaws, she was still my stepdaughter, the girl I had raised, the girl I had loved. And in that moment, I realized that holding on to my anger wasn't going to help any of us move forward. "I'm willing to try," I said finally, "but it's going to take time." She nodded, her relief palpable. "Thank you, Mom." Emily stayed with us for a few weeks, slowly rebuilding the bridges she had burned. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of tension, still wounds that hadn't fully healed, but there was also progress. She apologized to Michael, her sincerity breaking through the walls he had built around himself. And while things would never go back to the way they were, there was a sense of hope that hadn't been there before. As for Michael and me, we continued to work on our marriage. one day at a time. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Months turned into a year, and life began to take on a new shape. Emily moved out again, this time on better terms, and Michael and I found a new rhythm that worked for us. The scars of the past remained, but they were a reminder of how far we had come. Looking back, I realized that Emily's actions, as painful as they had forced us to confront truths we had been avoiding for years. They had broken us, yes, but they had also given us the chance to rebuild, stronger, more honest, and more connected than before. As I sat on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. The road ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. Months passed after Emily's departure, and Michael and I settled into an uneasy rhythm of coexistence. While we had worked hard to mend the fractures in our marriage, a lingering sense of unease hung over us like a dark cloud. Emily's parting words, "Don't think for a second this is over," resurfaced in my mind more often than I cared to admit. But as time wore on, I allowed myself to believe that the worst was behind us, until the day the email arrived. The email that changed everything. It was a Saturday morning, one of those rare moments when Michael and I were relaxed, sipping coffee on the back patio as sunlight filtered through the trees. The chime of my phone broke the serenity, and I glanced at the screen. A message from an unfamiliar address sat in my inbox, with a subject line that sent a chill down my spine. "You should know." "Spam?" Michael asked, noticing the frown on my face. "Huh," I said. "Probably," I said, though my gut told me otherwise. Clicking the email, I braced myself for what I might find. The message was short, just a single line accompanied by an attachment. "You've worked so hard to keep up appearances. Here's what they're really worth." My heart pounded as I opened the attachment, my hands trembling. The screen filled with a grainy video. Our video. "Claire?" Michael's voice broke through my shock. "What is it?" I couldn't answer. My eyes were glued to the screen where a scene from our most vulnerable moment played out in excruciating detail. A rush of humiliation washed over me, followed by a wave of cold fury. Emily had promised she wouldn't share the video, but now it was here, sent to me like a ticking time bomb. "Claire, what's going on?" Michael's voice grew sharper as he leaned closer. I slammed the phone down on the table, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "It's the video," I said finally, my voice shaking. "Someone sent it to me." "What?" Michael grabbed the phone, his face darkening as he read the email and watched the first few seconds of the video. He cursed under his breath, slamming the phone down. "This has to be Emily." "She promised she wouldn't share it," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. "Promises mean nothing to her," Michael snapped. "We need to confront her. Now." The confrontation. We drove to Emily's apartment, anger simmering between us. Michael's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, while I sat in silence, replaying the email in my mind. The audacity of it, the cruelty. It had Emily's fingerprints all over it. When we arrived, she opened the door with a surprised smile that quickly faded as she took in our expressions. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice wary. "You know damn well what's going on," Michael said, stepping into the apartment uninvited. "The video, the email. What the hell were you thinking?" Emily's eyes widened in genuine confusion. Or was it an act? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, I said, my voice trembling with anger. Someone sent us the video, Emily, the one you promised you wouldn't share. She looked between us, her brow furrowing. I didn't send anything, she said, her tone defensive. I told you I wasn't going to share it, and I meant it. And I smiled. Then how do you explain this? Michael demanded, holding up the phone. Emily snatched the phone and read the email, her face pale. This wasn't me, she said firmly, handing it back. I don't even have the video anymore. I deleted it. Why should we believe you? I asked, my voice laced with suspicion. Because I wouldn't do something like this, she snapped. I know I messed up before, but I'm not that cruel. Her words rang true in a way that left me unsettled. If Emily wasn't behind this, then who was? A new suspect. Back home, Michael and I sat at the kitchen table, the unanswered question hanging between us. Who else could have had access to the video? We'd been so careful. Or so we thought. What about her friends? Michael suggested, breaking the silence. Maybe she showed it to one of them and they decided to stir up trouble. Maybe, I said, though the idea felt far-fetched. Emily's friends were just as brazen as she was, but I couldn't imagine them going this far. Still, it was a possibility we couldn't ignore. We decided to investigate, starting with Emily's social media accounts. As we scrolled through her posts, looking for any clues, my phone buzzed again. Another email. This time, the subject line read, "Does Michael know?" I opened it hesitantly, my heart sinking as I read the message. You've been so careful to hide the truth from him. Let's see how long you can keep it up. Attached was a second video. My blood ran cold as I realized what it was. Footage from the night Emily watched our recording. The camera must have still been running when I confronted her, capturing our argument in vivid detail. Michael leaned over my shoulder, his expression darkening as he read the email and saw the attachment. This is getting out of hand, he said, his voice tight. Whoever this is, they're trying to destroy us. A web of deception. The emails kept coming over the next few days, each one more invasive than the last. They contained snippets of our private lives, arguments, tender moments, even mundane conversations that we thought had been ours alone. It was as if someone had been watching us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about the video. Someone wanted to dismantle our lives piece by piece, to expose every flaw and fracture in our marriage. But who? A revelation. Late one night, as Michael slept beside me, I found myself scrolling through the emails again, searching for a pattern. That's when I noticed it. A tiny detail in the metadata of one of the attachments. It was a location tag, pointing to a familiar address. Emily's apartment. My breath caught in my throat. Could she have been lying after all? Or was there another explanation? The next morning, I confronted her again, this time armed with the evidence. The emails are coming from your apartment, I said, holding up the phone. Explain that. Emily's face paled. I swear, I don't know anything about this, she said. But I think I know who might. She hesitated, as if weighing her next words carefully. There's this guy I dated a while back. He was intense, controlling. He hacked into my accounts once, just to prove he could. When I broke up with him, he swore he'd get back at me somehow. Why didn't you tell us this before? Michael demanded, his anger barely contained. Because I didn't think he'd go this far, she said, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't think he'd come after you. The final confrontation. With Emily's help, we tracked down her ex, a tech-savvy man named Derek who worked as an IT consultant. When we showed up at his office, he didn't even bother denying. "I told her she'd regret crossing me," he said with a smug grin. "And now you're paying the price." "You had no right," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "This was our private life. You violated us." "You violated yourselves," he shot back. "I just held up a mirror." Michael lunged at him, his fists clenched, but I held him back. "He's not worth it," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "We'll let the authorities handle this." And we did. Derek was arrested for cyberstalking and invasion of privacy, and while it didn't erase the damage he had done, it brought a sense of closure. The aftermath, the ordeal, left us shaken. But it also brought us closer in ways I hadn't expected. For all the pain and humiliation we had endured, it forced us to confront our vulnerabilities and stand united against a common enemy. As for Emily, she stayed in our lives, though her relationship with us was forever changed. She had played her part in the chaos, but she had also helped us uncover the truth and fight back. In the end, the experience left me with a profound understanding of the fragility of trust and the strength it takes to rebuild it. The weeks following Derek's arrest were surreal. For the first time in months, I felt a semblance of security knowing he couldn't torment us anymore. And yet, the damage had already been done. The invasive emails, the exposed video, the haunting knowledge that someone had weaponized our most private moments. It left scars that wouldn't heal overnight. Michael and I began seeing a therapist, something I never thought we'd do. It was awkward at first, sitting in that sterile office, answering questions about our intimacy, our communication, our trust. But slowly it became a space where we could lay everything bare, without fear of judgment. Emily, however, was another story. Rebuilding bridges with Emily. After Derek's arrest, Emily had stayed with us for a few days, shaken by the ordeal. She seemed quieter, subdued in a way I hadn't seen before. It was as if the fire that had always defined her had been extinguished. One evening I found her sitting on the porch, staring out at the darkened yard. I joined her, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders as the cool night air settled over us. As it drew in, "You okay?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. She shrugged, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I guess." We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the chirping of crickets. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't think he'd go that far," she said quietly. "I thought he'd just, I don't know, send me a nasty text or something. I didn't think he'd drag you into it." "Emily," I said, my voice soft but firm, "you have to understand that your actions, keeping that video, even for a moment, gave him the opportunity to do this. If you had deleted it sooner, none of this would have happened." Her shoulders slumped and she looked down at her hands. "I know, and I hate myself for it. I didn't want to let it go. It felt like proof of something. Proof that you and Dad were still capable of, I don't know, love." Her words caught me off guard, and I struggled to process the mix of vulnerability and guilt in her tone. "You could have asked us," I said gently. "You didn't have to invade our privacy to understand that." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I know. I messed up, Mom. I know I did." For the first time, I saw her not as the bold, defiant young woman who had pushed every boundary, but as a deeply flawed, deeply human daughter who had been trying to make sense of her place in our fractured family. "I forgive you," I said, reaching for her hand. But forgiveness doesn't mean there aren't consequences. You've got a lot to make up for, Emily. To me, to your dad, to yourself. She nodded again, her grip tightening on mine. I will, Mom. I promise.